Welcome everybody. This is Eric Kruger talking to you from the KMC factory in Northern Indiana. We want to welcome you all to the Total Control webinar today. Today we have Brad Green. He's our software product manager and supervises the software development group here at KMC. We're going to go through an overview of Total Control, what it is, walk through a little bit of Design Studios, and then spend some time answering questions that you guys submit in the window. So please submit questions as they come up, and we'll try to do our best to answer those as we move through the webinar. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brad, and we can talk about the webinar today.
Thanks, Eric. I'm going to get started off by kind of giving you a little bit of background and going through some of our product lines. So just as you can see from here, we got some KMC Conquest automation hardware built on BACnet, KM Digital hardware, which is our proprietary line, KMC Converge, KMC Commander, KMC Converge GFX, and today we're going to focus specifically on KMC Total Control. So the agenda for today, we're going to start off with a presentation here for some PowerPoint, and then we're going to get into a software demo. We're going to talk a little bit about the KMC software history, what Total Control is, what you can expect when you're ordering it and how to order it, what the part numbers are. We're going to go over the installation of the software, and then focusing on some migrations and things to consider there. And then to wrap things up, we're going to go to a live demo of Total Control 4.5, which was just released recently. And we're going to go over some of the new features in 4.5, as well as show you kind of what Total Control is made up of, focusing on some communication drivers, or what Design Studio means, how that relates to Total Control as a product. And then we're going to go into some graphics and give a quick little demonstration of that. So to get things started, to give you a little bit of history on KMC software, we started creating software back in the 90s. Software product was called In Control. It was a typical 90s based energy management software application. It was DOS based, it had a text based UI, very menu driven, didn't have any graphics, and that was used for our KMD or KM Digital product line. After that, we kind of moved into Win Control. Win Control was a native graphical user interface for Windows, and it replicated a lot of the programming ability that was found in Control. So you could program, configure your hardware. It also had the ability to do the graphics. So the graphics that were inside of Win Control, basically, they were just a listing of points, tabular list of points, and they were collected. Those tabular list of points were called system groups. Those system groups were had points that you brought in, then they were bound into a graphic, and you basically specify X, Y coordinates to put the information over top of an image. We had a few different releases of Win Control. There's 2 XL and then XL Plus. During that time, we had our legacy BACnet line of hardware, which we used Backstage. It was very similar to Win Control. That was about in 2004 era. From there, we moved into Total Control. The first release of Total Control only supported BACnet. Then with Total Control 2, we added some more functionality. It was able to speak to KMD and OPC. Then we moved into Total Control 3. It's been out there since about 2006-ish, give or take, maybe a little bit later, 2010. And that kind of put a lot of new graphic structure in place at that time. It still communicated to BACnet, KMD, and OPC. Then we moved to TotalControl 4, which is the most recent. That was about a 2015 timeframe. At that time, we also launched KMC Connect, which is a configuration utility and mainly used as a technician tool, which we'll get into some of that. But what I want you to try to focus on is that the KMD hardware that's out there today, is mainly programmed through InControl, WinControl, BACnet, Backstage, and TotalControl 1 and 2. And then TotalControls 3 and 4 and Connect have the ability to communicate, program both of those system types, those hardware system types. So TotalControl as a software solution is comprised of many things. It is a client server-based software. It runs services that are installed on the local machine that you will run in the background, so you don't have to have the application open. It has a network manager, resource manager, handles schedules, application deployment. You can do graphic creation. It'll do trending and security, alarm monitoring. All that is built, the application itself is built on a .NET framework, and it's stored in a Microsoft SQL database. So once you install TotalControl, you'll have a Microsoft SQL backend that is storing all the configuration, alarms, and trends for backup and restore purposes. And then we also have TotalControl Web Portal, which the Web Portal is for the end user interface. It leverages Windows IIS on the machine. Historically, all of our TotalControl Web Portal access is viewed in Flash. With the most recent release of 4.5, we are now supporting HTML5 browser rendering, and try to show you some of that later in the demonstration. There are quite a few abilities inside of the TotalControl Web Portal access that the end users have. They can also do alarm monitoring and some setup, trend viewing, schedule management. They also have reporting capabilities, and there's security and user access control in there. And then as a whole, TotalControl, when we get to the part number screen next, I want to talk a little bit about what you see in the part numbers and the communication drivers that we support. So when you look at ordering TotalControl, you'll see some of our part numbers are labeled as TC back and TC back unlimited, and then TC KMD and TC KMD unlimited. So since they're sold as individual services, if you need to think about the TC back and TC KMD and TC OPC as well as basically what you're buying is the communication driver. You're buying a service that is a communication driver that communicates out to that individual product line. And then there's TotalControl Studio or TC Studio that you can purchase as well. And that since this is a multi-seat application, you can purchase additional seats. So if you have a server set up and you have remote programmers that are going to access the single server as multiple clients to that server to make configuration changes, you can purchase additional seats of Design Studio as well. So to get into just a couple quick examples of what you would want to order if you were looking to purchase TotalControl, from a small site perspective, when you purchase the communication drivers, they're at a group of 50 as the limit for TC back. You can go up to 50 devices. And then if you're going to go higher than 50, you'd need to purchase the unlimited copy. So for a small site with 45 BACnet devices, and say you're going to have an on-site PC, which is going to host graphics, for an end user, that's just going to be a single seat. When I say single seat for that application, for the web access, you can have multiple users. You can have 20 users in there. However, only one user can be on at a time. So if we flip back to the part numbers here real quick, and you can see TC1 or TC Web 1 add, which if we needed to add multiple concurrent web users for end customers, that's where you would want to purchase the web add. So back to this slide here for the small site. So that all you would need to order to get that customer set up is just TC back. As the system integrator setting up the customer, you're going to use your technician key, and you're going to configure with TotalControl their entire site, publish all their graphics, set up their network, set up all their alarming and trending. You're going to unplug your technician key. You're going to plug in the customer key that just has the site key that just has TC back, and it'll go ahead and run, and they can access the web portal portion of that TotalControl installation and view and control their site. So then moving up to a medium-sized site, if you had, say, 120 KMD devices out there, say a bunch of VAV boxes, and then they had some open protocol backnet air handlers, about 15 of those, and they wanted to have the ability to program on site at their PC. And then they wanted to have multiple users for their web seats. So they would order the KMD Unlimited, TC back, and the studio copy so that they can do the programming. Now, one of the things I want to make mention of is that when you order the KMD Unlimited or the back Unlimited, that you will get unlimited web seats, web user seats with that. So you don't need to purchase the web add. It will come with the unlimited copy. So you can have as many concurrent users as you want. And then looking at a large campus deployment, you have 500 KMD devices, 350 backnet devices. And let's just say that campus has got, they're going to install on a server, and they're going to have a couple different programmers out there that have their own laptop that want to have TotalControl as a client application installed on their laptop that they can use connected to the server to make configuration changes. So what they would order then is the unlimited copies, because you're above 50 for each of your communication drivers. And you'd also purchase an additional 2 copies of Studio so that you could have those programmers use their client applications. So what are some of the differences between WinControl, Backstage, and KMC Connect and TotalControl? WinControl and Backstage are a single seat application. You have a graphical setup that's held locally on the machine. So as you're configuring graphics, earlier we were talking about the system groups. When you set up a graphic on the machine, you set up that system group, and on your machine, you're going to have a file that specifies the XY coordinates. So anybody that's worked with WinControl before, and you've come in and tried to look at a graphical page and you don't see it laid out on top of anything, everything's just kind of pushed up into the upper corner. That's because you don't have the graphical file on your machine that specifies where those go. So of that time and era of software, what it was you had to create your graphic. It would save to your machine. Now, if you wanted somebody else, a different technician or a different user, to see that same graphic as you, what you had to do is you had to copy your graphical files and give them to them and have them put it on their computer so that it knew where to place that information from that system group. How TotalControl differs a little bit is it is more of a client server based application. So as you're making configuration changes after you install TotalControl, you're updating the SQL instance you're updating the database of what is stored in Total Control. And if another client comes in, most of the time you're using the client on the machine. So it's similar to like a Niagara operation with the Workbench. When you launch it from your machine, you're viewing your machine, but you can also make client connections out to other supervisors or other JACEs. It's the same thing with Total Control here. So think of Total Control Design Studio as the client application, or Workbench, if you will, from Niagara terms, and you connect into the server, which is again Total Control running on the server, and you're seeing a representation through your client of what's configured on the server. That's where the multiple software seats and concurrent users come in. Now, if you do have a single license of Design Studio, you could have it installed in two places. You can have it installed on the server. You can also have it installed on a client machine, and both will work and both can make configuration changes. However, you can't do it concurrently. So you can have two different installations and have a single key and have two users using Total Control Design Studio, as long as it's not at the same time. And then lastly, KMC Connect. So KMC Connect is predominantly used as a technician configuration tool. So once it's installed, it's a single executable. It's not a service-based software package. So you install it, you launch the executable. It will launch essentially Design Studio, and you can make connections out to KMD and BACnet systems. What you cannot do is you cannot set up the graphical pages. You can't publish graphical pages. Those things are going to be restricted to the Total Control application, but you can make a lot of configuration changes on BACnet. You can still do application deployment through our libraries. You can still do backups and restores. It has a lot of features of our Design Studio component, but it just runs in a single executable. And again, it has to be running to be working. So it's not a services-based solution like Total Control. When you have Total Control, once it's running as a service. You can close the application. It's still running in the background. So a little bit of difference there between Connect, essentially Design Studio, and Total Control Design Studio. So for upgrades and migrations, KMC is end-of-lifing Backstage and Wind Control on March 31st. I want you to be reassured that if you have a site key out there and the system is running, it's not going to stop working on March 31st. It will continue to run. We would like to continue to support the product. However, as Windows updates come along, it gets tougher and tougher and tougher to support legacy software solutions. It just becomes very difficult. And that's why it's moving to end of life. But your site deployments will continue to work. What you need to focus on is creating a migration plan. You can contact KMC support. We will help you through it. There are some key changes that you'll want to think about during your migration, one of which is hardware keys. Total Control, aside from a technician point of view for the key, Total Control site keys cannot reside with Wind Control site keys. So you will need to get a new key. Total Control does have the ability to do soft keys where Wind Control and Backstage did not, which that can be helpful in some cases. So you can think about that. But you will need to plan to have a new key. Also, the graphics that you created, there's no way to move the graphics from Wind Control and Backstage into Total Control. They cannot be reused. Caveat to that is that Wind Control as we talked about for the system groups, what that did was again, it was putting all your points that you wanted on your graphic into a tabular form and making it so that all those points are read quickly and together to make the graphics work well. The system group portion that was created can be reused and can be read in TotalControl. So I'll give an example of that later in the demonstration, but I want you to know that that optimization can still transcend into TotalControl. However, the individual graphics and the images cannot. Another thing to consider is changes to the network. If you have an existing deployment that is a tier 2 connection, which is a serial port connection to the existing product, we really recommend you look to put in place a tier 1 device, which is an Ethernet-based device like a LAN controller. It can communicate Ethernet to the TotalControl instance, and then the LAN controller itself can communicate the serial connections out to the tier 2 unitary-based devices. Couple reasons for that is that, as we talked about, we can't stop Windows from providing new OSs and new updates, and serial communication drivers that are built through USB connections and our ComTalk connection, it might not always be there. So trying to future-proof your solution and make it as robust as possible, moving to an Ethernet-based deployment is the recommended route to go. So those are some things to think about as you start to plan your migration. And again, please reach out to technical support, customer support for help in planning. I'd be more than happy to help you. Okay, customers that are at TotalControl and they're at TotalControl 3 and they're moving to TotalControl 4. What are some things to think about? You want to think about the machine operating system first and foremost. TotalControl 3, there's a lot of TotalControl 3 instances out there. It was launched back in 2010 for TotalControl 3. So as you can imagine, back in 2010, we were at quite a different machine operating system than we are now. So you need to verify the requirements. You need to look at what is your current machine running? Is it compatible with TotalControl 4.5? Do I need to plan an upgrade? If I am planning an upgrade, do I need to switch machines? What does that mean to me? Is my IP address going to change? How is that going to affect my networking currently? Do I have a large backnet deployment? Do I need to update BBMD tables or infrastructure in place? Also, you need to look at your SQL instances and what you were running previously. A lot of them might be running SQL 2005 or older, and that's just not going to be compatible with 4.5. So you need to look through what the requirements are for 4.5 in our reference manual and make sure it fits in line with what your current deployment is. And then also record all of your login details and verify that they're working before you make the change. And the one thing I can't focus in enough on is make backups. Make backups of your application, go into SQL Management Studio, make a full SQL database backup beforehand, go into TotalControl. We have backup application features there where you can make a full TotalControl instance backup. If you want to make individual backups for your devices, make as much backup as you can so that if something goes awry, that you have something to fall back on. And for planning and questions, please reach out to us and in advance. We'd rather work with you in advance than try to resolve a situation that comes up later. So once you get past, once you have your plan and you're going to install TotalControl 4.5, what can you expect? After downloading it from our partner portal, It's a single setup.exe file installation. It's got some options that you're going to go through. You're going to see a welcome screen that has, whether you're doing a typical installation, which is brand new, you're going to install everything, whether you're going to do a restore, which is using the existing backup that you've made from your previous deployment, or if you're going to do a custom installation. So in our example, for the small site, we just had a small BACnet deployment. We're not going to use any KMD or OPC. We can go ahead and go select custom from the installation menu and go through and uncheck those options for KMD and OPC, so those services aren't running on the machine. Okay, I'm going to move over to a little bit of a software demonstration now and show you some of the total control features. Okay, once you've installed Total Control, you're gonna have a couple new icons on your desktop, one of which is gonna be your Total Control Services panel. So these are the services that get installed with Total Control. You can see their status when you launch the services panel. You can also do configuration changes to the service from this location, and you can also see what their license status is. So in this instance, you can see that on the top two there, BACnet and KMD, it says unlimited devices. So I'm using the BAC unlimited and KMD unlimited. So this is a handy service panel so that you can go in and see what's happening with your services. You can also see them through the Windows Server Manager as well. So then Design Studio. This is Total Control 4.5 Design Studio. I'm going to start off with kind of giving you a tour around some of the panels here. We have our Network Manager. The Network Manager is where we're going to make connections out to the individual networks. So if I'm going to go look at BACnet network here, and let's go into one of my networks, and let's look at a individual device here. So if I double click on this device, it's going to go out over BACnet and read in the information about that device. It'll be shown over here, and you can see information about the device. You can also change information. These individual forms that are laid out here are typically based on little chevrons, so you can expand and collapse all the information, try to lay them out into groupings that make sense for you. If, like on this device, say we wanted to go look at some communication parameters. So we'd go out and look at the communication parameters, so I can tell that this device is running at a 38 4K baud rate. So you can see some other information. You can make changes, save the changes, and save them out to the device. So that's how they connect to a device. Underneath the device, if we wanted to go look at a individual analog value object, we could connect to that, double click on it to see more information. Again, it will pull up a chevron-based form with some information in it, where we can see different attributes about that object. And we're looking at just a single object here, just the analog value object 1. We could also look at all the analog value objects. So if we look at the analog value objects folder and we double click on that, one thing to note is as you're operating in Design Studio, you'll notice that as you click on things that we're getting more tabs across the top here. So if we wanted to go back and look at just that AV, it is opening up new tabs for you so you can see that information pretty easily. So on the value objects folder, the default view is not a chevron-based form here. It's going to be a table view. And this is a standard table view that we use on a lot of our folder-based objects. You can also create custom table views where you can see, you can bring in different points and create your own table views that might be more helpful for your stuff. So that's BACnet, very similar to KMD. So I'm gonna go, let me remove this guy here. I'll show you how we create a KMD network. So if we expand the KMD service that's running, we got an existing network there. And say we want to connect to a new network, we can specify that connection. Here we're going to make a connection to a tier 1, which is an Ethernet-based system. We do, like I said, support the tier 2 connection. You will have to get the hardware and COM drivers set up and associated for that to work. So we're going to make a connection out to an IP-based controller. Click OK. So once we make the connection out to that, in that case, I think it was a LAN light panel. However, that main panel, that Ethernet panel, also knew and was on the network with other panels. So it is going to go ahead and bring in everything on that network and show me underneath this network node. So those are all devices that are on that network. So I'll let that go ahead and pull in some of these devices. As you see, they're kind of a gold color now, and they're green text. They're being read in, and everything about those devices are being brought in to the network. So if I go over to other network and while that's working, I'll go to the KMD main panel on this network. Go look at some inputs here. One thing I want to point out is how we color differentiate between different things. So for instance, this input 2, if we double click on it to see information about it, it's a KMD system. It's an input and it's set to binary. So that's why it's green over here. The blue is for analog, green is for digital. And same thing with KMD. If we don't want to just look at the individual point or variable, we can look at the folder itself, and it will have a table view as well, and it will go out and request all the information for all the inputs so that they're read in a table view. So once that information comes back, and it'll be presented in a table view so you can see everything. So here's input 2. We can see that it's a binary input. It shows us the present value. It also shows us all the information about the other inputs as well. We had talked about system groups and what that means. So here we have a main panel, and we had some existing graphics set up in WinControl. And let's say we were using system group 1. And in system group 1, we had a bunch of inputs, outputs, and variables. They're all still in there. And this is what can be reused. So when we create a graphical page for this controller or system, let's say we had a graphical page that was pointed at N25. If we have just that point on the screen, once it sees that N25 is on the screen, it's going to prioritize all these other points that are in this system group to pull those with priority so that they come in faster, so that your graphics are optimized. So even changing from WinControl over to TotalControl, you're still going to have good performance on your graphics, especially if you get to or focus on maintaining the same points as you move over with your graphics. One more thing about BACnet, as you can see here, I have a lot of BACnet networks. When you issue like a discover, when it goes to bring everything in from the network, it can bring in a lot of stuff. And like you can do that here by doing find devices. If you do regenerate all networks, it will remove all your networks and then regenerate everything. But if you want to do these find devices and specify and find everything that's on the line, you could have a lot, especially in a really large deployment. So one of the things I wanted to point out is if you go to Files and Options, in the Options dialog under Site, you can set your discovery mode to full or limited. And basically what that means is that once you do the discovery, how much information are you going to pull back from that device? Do you want to know just the device and some important things, or do you want to get all the AVs, all the BVs, and all that information back? So it can really be stressful on your network when you're pulling in all that information. So setting it to limited discovery might be a good thing for an existing deployment if you're pulling in a new client application where you're pulling the things in. Going through the rest of the Design Studio, if we go down here to the output window, this is going to be some messages about what's happening inside a Design Studio, similar to like an output dialog for a Niagara application. You can filter this out. If I filter out the messages by clicking on messages, I can filter out the errors and focusing on just what I need by the buttons at the top here. Then I can also right click and I can clear everything in the output window. So if I'm having a reoccurring message or something's happening, you can do some debug there. The resource manager is where you hold resources for your jobs. It's where you make backups. It's where your templates are stored. It's where we have standard applications from our application library. And most importantly, it's where you create backups. So let's just say I wanted to make a backup of a controller, and I have a controller out here, my test controller, and I want to make a backup of this controller. So I've made my configuration changes, I've programmed all my analog values and set up all my controllers. So I just have to click and drag and drop him into the resource manager. And it's going to go through and it's going to save all the configuration information about that controller. It's going to create a full backup and then put it offline in your file system on your machine. So as you're working with technical support, if you have an issue, you'll probably hear us say something along the lines of, can you send us a BND? And if you notice, these files are a .bnd. They're a serialized file that has all the information about the objects and values, and you can pull that off into your file system. You can also make changes here, create your own custom applications, make changes offline, and then drag and drop it back onto the device. So you can do those things as well. But when we ask you for a backup, that's kind of what we mean. It's this process here of just creating a backup of the device over to the resource manager. Also in the resource manager, it's not just devices. You can set up graphical pages over here. So we have a like I put one in here for a graphical page, and I'll show you kind of how we use that here in just a second. I'm going to move over here to the Site Explorer, which is our kind of our graphical front end or work area. So if I want to just create a new graphic, I'm just going to go up here into the Site Explorer and create a new graphic and demo graphic. And once I start a new graphic, it's going to give me a blank canvas, and I can drag and drop what I want onto the canvas. We have a bunch of libraries here that you can work from. So if we want to add some ductwork, so we just add a piece of ductwork here and maybe an end cap. And say we want to add some fans. Drop a fan in there. And we have some interactive buttons and controls that you can use. So let's just put a button on there to control that fan, and maybe a text box so that we can program some data, send some data down to the controller. And let's give it some feedback. Let's put just a text representation there. So if I come into my controller now and go to my analog values, and I have a test value here, use for AB30, just click and drag and drop it onto the item you want to bind it to. And let's do binary values. Here's a value, drop it onto the switch. Also drop it right onto the fan. Then we'll drop it onto the status too. Okay, so once you have your graphic configured, you'll notice over here we got our demo graphic. It's got a little gray check mark symbol, which means that you're in development. You have that document checked out to this copy of Design Studio. So if somebody else had Design Studio and they were working on a graphic, you might see that little check marks there, but it might be somebody else that's editing a graphic. So I can save it and I can close it out. And if I say I close it out, it's going to ask me, do you want to check in the page? Yes, I want to check in the page. So once I've done that, now the page is completed, it's saved, and it's got this little mark next to it, which means it hasn't been published to our web server yet. So customers with the Total Control web interface still can't see that. So you can do these in advance and then go ahead and set your permissions and user assignments and all that kind of stuff up next. And then before you publish it. So to publish, right click on it and publish to web server. And that'll go that will publish this one page out to the web server. So if we go look at it real quick in the view in the web browser, log in. And if you have permissions to view the page, it'll pull up that page and you can go ahead and make changes to your items. And interact with the objects and properties and devices and stuff you set up in your graphics. So how do we, again, use this resource manager? So I have my element test over here. I'm going to click and drag. Let's just say it's a standard VAV that you want to use, that you're always using, so you don't want to have to create it every time. You have it in your resource manager, click and drag, and then if I look at it inside of the site, all my setup and configuration will already be there. So I just need to rebind points and publish, and then I'm off and going. Okay, next I want to show you some of the features of, well, I guess so in Total Control Web, once you assign user accounts, there's, like I was saying, there's a lot of options and things that are configuration inside of Total Control Web that the end users can do. You can lock them out from these items, so you don't have to give them permission, but you can do trend viewers, alarm viewers, schedule management, reports, and then navigation. So your individual pages that you publish, you can restrict users from accessing, so you can limit user operation to the different pages. So I'm going to go out to a test page here because I'm going to show you some features of the new HTML5 for Total Control Web, and then after that we'll open it up to some questions. So all the pages can now render in HTML5. This page is all HTML5 based. I'm going to switch over to Flash version, and as we're running into a lot with customers, Flash is being not supported anymore in the browser, so you have to go ahead and allow it and then, or unblock it and then connect. So a couple of things that you might see through there. You see these big red dots that are coming up. Those are the icons that we've always published in Flash. You'll notice that between Flash, this page is a Flash-based graphic, and if I flip over to an HTML5, that it looks really similar. The dots were blue, a little bit smaller. Graphics still look pretty much the same, very, very close, and we did that by design. Some of the things we did change in the little blue dot, if I hover over it, it tells me that it's reading that point. The little red dot is going to tell me that it's an error. So we've built in some different icon feedback to let the users know what's happening with those objects. We've also built in some timed overrides. So if I click on this, right click on this input box and click override as the option and set up an immediate override. And let's just say I want to go for 15 minutes. Once I invoke it, it's got a little purple dot. And any additional binding that's on there that's overridden will also get a purple dot associated with it. I can also do overrides to a later time, so I can schedule it. So if I want this to be scheduled at 1800 hours and it's going to go for 30 minutes later in the day, click OK, and this will schedule an override to happen in the future. If that is the case, it will still put an information icon to let you know that that's scheduled for the future and it is going to override at that time, but just let all the users know that an override is pending. The HTML5 switching to go back and forth, you can set that up inside of Design Studio. There is a properties page that applies to your site, or you can select your icon modes, whether it's minimal or your standard. You can allow the switching. You can set your site to default to Flash or HTML5. You can also, since timed overrides is a new feature, from this site page, you can set the individual user groups up to who's allowed to invoke timed overrides. You can also do it through the security manager at the site level and make changes there as well if you're more familiar with that. One last thing on the HTML5 switching is if you need an individual page to render in a certain type, we've also built that in to where it defaults to the site default, but you can specify if you want it to be Flash or HTML5 specifically on an individual page. All right, and that wraps everything up for me. I'll turn it back over to Eric with some question and answers.
All right, we've had a few questions come in, so we'll walk through a few of them, and certainly if you guys think of more or have other suggestions you want us to cover, please continue to submit that in the chat window. Since we're here in TotalControl in the demo, a question comes up, are there ways to template either information from the controllers or templatize my graphics so I don't have to keep rebuilding them every time?
Right, yeah, it's a good question. Yes, you can, when you drag these over, it's the process of what we showed earlier is when you want to create a template, it's as simple as grabbing your template that you configured and clicking and dragging it over here to your resource manager. That becomes your template. You can also make offline changes. So you could make changes to your AVs. You can make changes to your code programs offline, save everything. And then when you want it, that is essentially your template then. So you can click and drag the opposite way. So not to make a backup, but kind of to restore, you're going to click and drag your device here and drop it over onto your other device. And then from there, you can select what you want to override. There's a lot of options there. You can select specific items, only, control basic programs, only variables, a lot of options there. But basically, the resource manager is almost like a template library.
Sure. The other portion of that answer I would refer people to is, we're only scratching the surface of TotalControl here. And specifically on graphics, you can relativize graphics in that Site Explorer. We've done a whole webinar already that's recorded and available just on demonstrating the graphics relativization. So if you're sitting at home or sitting at work and want to have a little bit of a training session there, check out that webinar and learn how that can save you some time. Next question we have is, what all is required for the timed overrides? Do I need any special licensing for that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we actually have, it's gonna come standard with 4.5. And I'm gonna go switch back over, minimize this here for a second. And I'm gonna switch back to some of the part numbers to reference what we're doing there. One of the part numbers that you'll see is called TC Gate. It's a protocol gateway service. Going forward in 4.5, that's going to come standard and free of charge with all installations. Now, to switch back over to the Design Studio to say how that operates, if we look back at the Network Manager, we have a protocol gateway service. So in exchanging information between these two networks, between, let's just say, BACnet and KMD, if you want to set something like that up, that's leveraged inside of the protocol gateway, and that handles exchanging that information. So it's reading an input and writing it out to something else. We're reusing a lot of that communication that's built behind the scenes for timed overrides. So nothing is required to purchase as of right now, because as you move forward with 4 or 5, we're including that feature for free. So there's no additional licensing change.
So another question related to moving to 4.5. If we have an existing site, either TotalControl 3 or TotalControl 4, and I'm moving to 4.5, do I have to republish my graphics to get HTML5?
Yes, it's a good practice to republish your graphics. Not all of the elements are supported. And we can look back here and we can look back at these two different graphics. So if we look at how close everything looks, these are our custom graphics, or our standard graphics, I'm sorry. If you created custom graphics and custom things, it's more difficult for us to make it look and operate the same way, and to make sure the features are working correctly, to go back and forth and work in both. You will want to republish. We've made a couple of improvements on our side to make that easier for you. Inside of the Site Explorer, if you right click, you can, there used to be a publish to web server option, and then there's a republish to web server option now. And what that will do is all of your pages that were previously published will republish. Before, we only had this, and if you were in the middle of working on pages, not that they were checked out, but they were available there, it would publish them, and maybe you didn't want that to happen. So we've added the option to republish to web server when you transition over to 4.5, so that if you have, let's just say I had 10 graphics here that are published, and that's the icon here, it will only republish those graphics. If this graphic is not published, it won't republish it. If this graphic is checked out, it won't republish it. So it'll just republish the ones that are in use today in your current installation.
Sure. Okay, there's been a couple questions again on like part numbers and what do I need to order. So maybe we go back to that slide in the presentation.
Sure.
You talked about device limits, but are there point limitations to those licenses?
No, the only restriction we put in place is on the devices. 50 and unlimited is the key words there, or the key things to think about.
Sure. And then the follow on to that, and it might be a point of clarification for those new to TotalControl. If you want a unlimited license, you do need to order the base license as well. It's an add-on to be unlimited. So that kind of covers part numbers. The other part number we have a question about is TC Kiosk. TC Kiosk enables a computer to be put in kiosk mode, so it will rotate through several graphics. Think of an atrium lobby or something like that, where you want to have a kiosk without having a login required. Generally, nobody's interacting with that page. They're just viewing it, again, without having to log in periodically. The last couple questions we'll finish up on here are relating to, I have a wind control site and I want to migrate to TotalControl. You know, what all is required, and what's the best thing that we can do to get that process started? So I think Brad kind of touched on this in the presentation, but we can certainly reiterate it. Every deployment varies, so there's no one size fits all answer. The best thing that we can recommend is plan out your install, think through it. We had a slide about the bullet points, the processes that we would walk through as we update a site. Know your logins, keep your backups. Many times we see as people are doing an upgrade or doing an install, a lot of times the process fails or gets stalled out or tied up in IT is when we haven't quite covered all of these steps. I don't know my SQL login. I don't have my hardware key updated, things like that. So, if Brad, has any other thoughts there on kind of the best practices?
Yeah, it's
migrating.
Make backups, put a plan in place. There's planning it out and taking your time. There's also the ability in a lot of cases that I've seen where it's a slower transition. You'll have a wind control machine that's on an older piece of hardware, an old server or an old desktop, and you're deploying a new server for the customer, and it's running TotalControl. And the two can reside and talk to the devices together. However, we don't recommend that for long-term usage. It is okay to do during a changeover scenario for a period of time. However, you have two software solutions that are pulling that data and they're fighting for that information, so it does degrade performance. So if you have multiple copies of software where it's not a client server application, where the wind control is standalone and your TotalControl is client server, so they're both making requests out on the line and they're fighting with each other. So it's okay, it works. It's just that long term you'll want to move away from that. But plan out your transition. It's all right if it takes time.
Sure, patience. All right. Well, we've covered most of our questions, and we are a bit up against our time limit. So if you have further questions or ideas for follow-on TotalControl webinars, we'll leave the question window open for a little bit here. So keep those questions coming in. We can have someone follow up with you and get you an answer. Or again, we can plan additional webinars for any of the individual features that we weren't able to dive into in TotalControl today. So with that, I want to thank everyone for coming. Please submit your ideas in the chat window, and we hope everybody is staying safe and healthy and enjoying a little extra time with their family throughout our current situation. So have a great day, and we'll talk to you later.
Thank you, everybody.